Welcome to 21st Century Issues. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan. Today we're talking about terrorism. Terrorism has been going on for years. Today we're going to talk about why it's going to continue. With me today is Police Chief Larry Scott from the Broadview Police. Also with me is Joe Valachik, a student here at RB. And also with me is Gene Karcheski, who is a police chief at Riverside Police. Also with me is Jan Goldberg, a social science teacher here at RB. Brant Abrahamson, who was an ex-teacher here in social sciences at RB, and Ashley Bolt, another student here at RB. We're going to start talking about what are the causes of terrorism, and is it because of the religion? Is it because they're political leaders? What is pushing terrorism in this world right now?
I would think that terrorism is basically being pushed because of religious beliefs from third world countries. It's a phenomenon where people have an ideology and it's a belief system that they're brought up with from the very beginning, and it transpons through their adult years, and it becomes a obsession with them. And as far as the homeland coming back to the United States, I think that the United States has a reputation, and we have a animosity towards us as being Americans throughout the world because we've been the best of everything. And I believe a lot of this is to strike back at the American public itself.
And the religious aspects, I think, are the extremism to that religion. For example, you can't say that all Islamic people are terrorists, and the beliefs of the Quran are the beliefs of, the Western religions. The Bible preaches
they hold
peace.
Some aspects as the Bible.
And I think the Bible and what they call the Quran has been perverted into an extremist philosophy that preaches things that are not followed by most of the Islamic world. That this is a very small percentage of people that follow these terrorist ideas because they think the next life is going to give them more of whatever they aren't getting in this life. And I don't think of it as, there's so many causes. That your question can't be answered, I don't think, with just one cause, religion. That's a cause, but you have to take the religion and realize that it's I think, perverted interpretation of the religion.
But the fundamentalism out of which this comes, by fundamentalism, a very literal interpretation of the hardest aspects of a particular faith. This is a worldwide phenomenon, and one of our local scholars, Dr. Marty in Riverside, spent 5 years at the University of Chicago a few years ago trying to get a handle on what it is on a worldwide scale that is causing, within religions, a small minority of people to decide that they have a personal pipeline to God, that they are the only ones who know the truth, and God has told me to kill off everybody who disagrees with me in one way or another.
You think religion or political leaders are more responsible for the acts of terrorism?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me?
Go ahead.
I think it's equal. If you want to talk about political causes or political leaders, you go back to the formation of Israel, and the United States is the reason that Israel exists. So anybody connected with the United States or with Israel, Jews around the world, Jews in America, Jews in Israel, they are the target of this extreme terrorism. And I think that's one reason why the United States is deemed, not that they were hated by the entire world, but we're hated for a few specific acts that we have perpetrated on the world. And I think the formation of Israel was the #1 act that is anathema to
handed it over to them.
Well, when we divided up the land, Arabs in the area said this is my land, Israel said it was theirs, it was Palestine. If you want to go back even further, World War I, the British owned the land, and they kind of blew it, in my opinion, on what was going on there then, and then, the whole situation with the Holocaust, and the United States afterward, I think, feeling kind of guilty about not doing enough to help the situation, in the simplest sense, gave the Jewish people their homeland as kind of a, I'm sorry, we didn't do enough. Here's our token of guilt. And I think since that time, there's been many, many, many other acts that the United States has gotten involved with that is anathema to the Arab world.
It's kind of questionable.
Well, I was thinking that a lot of the reasons that have been brought up for the reason of terrorism, I think that a lot of the reasons could be justified why these people have come to power, but I think at the core of it, it's always just a very, very ambitious people that are using whatever fear or the hatred burrowed in these people because of past occurrences that they can point out to further their own goals. And either would it be religion or just hatred for the United States for whatever reasons. I think what we have at the core of terrorism is very just ambitious people that would like to further themselves, and I believe they just use a lot of these things for excuses to gain power.
I agree.
Well, one of the things I think hasn't been brought up, and should definitely be brought up, is there's poverty and ignorance. And when you have poverty and ignorance, uneducated people, they're more prone to follow doctrines and intensive schooling relative to fanaticism. And whether it be in Europe, as we talked about earlier with the Serbs and what they did, and the Christians did to Muslims, Muslims are doing to Christians, I think even if you look at crime in the United States, it's usually a poverty-based symptom. So it goes to, my opinion, it's one of the major causes of it is the ignorance and poverty.
Well, if you think poverty is a big issue, I'm not saying the people of Chicago, but some of our residents of Chicago are in poverty. You think those people might be capable of terrorism?
Terrorism? No. I mean, internal crime, certainly. But terrorism, I couldn't see organized cells of American citizens attacking the country, although we have militias, and they have done stuff in the past. Certainly McVeigh. But a breeding ground where you have camps of people, everybody in the camp is destitute, or if you take a look at the country, some of the news footage that's been coming out of Afghanistan, it's frightening. Sudan, Ethiopia, all these places where people are starving to death, where there's a lack of hope.
People
you have
feel
fanaticism.
They're going to be able to go
in
ahead.
the United States, you have all kinds of ways to express yourself,
Exactly.
to try to get followers.
Good point.
I mean, you can vote, or you can do some direct action,
Protest.
or you can, if you want to get a little beyond that, maybe deny people use of their property by striking or whatever. In many of these countries, I mean, you have leaders that are controlling with an iron fist, and you don't have all of this layered way, or these layered ways to make your case. Yeah.
There's not legal means of protest is what you're saying. And I think what he said about the poverty is very, very true. But again, going back to the politics, if you just take the country of Afghanistan, in a way, we left that country high and dry after the United States used the Afghan rebels to fight against the Soviets, in the 70s and 80s, and maybe some kind of Marshall Plan could have been in order to, I don't know, alleviate some of the poverty, rescue some of the people so they wouldn't feel so desperate. I know this is all hindsight, and it's easy to say we should have done this and we should have done that. But looking at some of the news footage, I mean, you could see, our history with some of these countries, and the mistakes just jump out at you.
Yeah, well, I think it's not only Afghanistan, it's the entire Middle East. And when you talked about policies, and I think it appears to people in the Middle East that it's one-sided, all towards Israel and nothing for them. And I think our government's got to take a stand that's going to be more neutral. And at the same time recognize our friends, but they're going to have to take a stand that's going to, and I'm not saying appease them, I'm just saying become more neutral in helping people from poverty up. And you can give, right now, only two countries are getting almost all of our aid, Egypt and Israel. In the whole Middle East, there's something wrong with that.
I agree.
I'd like everyone to hold their thoughts for a second. We have to take a commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages, back to 21st Century Issues. Thank you. Century Issues. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan. If you weren't following us earlier, we were talking about terrorism. Before we're talking about causes of terrorism, now we're going to move on to how we can combat terrorism and what our local communities here at Riverside Brookville High School is doing to combat that terrorism. We'll start off with you, Police Chief Larry Scott. What is the Broadview Police Department doing to combat terrorism?
Well, first of all, terrorism is nothing new to our country. If you look back in 1995, we had the bombing of the Murdoch building in Oklahoma City. And the recent acts in New York City, what this has done, it's brought the war onto the soil of the United States. We've never had a war fought in our country, and that's what we have now. It's a war on terrorism. What we've seen is a creation within the last couple of weeks through the U.S. Attorney General's Office of the Anti-Terrorism Task Force on the federal level. And what they do is they disseminate information down to the state police and the local police on suspected activities, sites that have to be hardened up within the municipalities or cities of City of Chicago, for example. And I think we saw this on the news last night. We saw with the Sears building where they were hardening it up, putting concrete around it so they could avoid a barricade, avoid a bombing incident over there. So what we're seeing is on the federal level, it's passing down to the state level and the local level. I know for the state of Illinois, we do have anti-terrorist groups that are district out throughout the state. We have coordinators that we contact with. I don't know if Gene was with me, but 2 weeks ago, downtown City of Chicago, Superintendent Hillard called for a meeting of suburban police chiefs. There were 80 of us that attended down there. And in the course of this meeting, Superintendent Hillard came out and said that the City of Chicago is relying on its neighbors in the suburbs to help them. If we have an incident in Chicago that they had in New York, we as suburban police officers would have to deploy our resources to the city. And in the same way, if we had an incident out here in one of our water reclamation plants or something, or the refineries in McCook, that the City of Chicago would also help participate. Yeah. So what we're seeing is a mutual agreement between the towns
and
themselves.
Quite frankly, I've done that. The City of Chicago's been extremely responsive to all our needs out here, whether it be from local crime issues, but getting back to this thing, when I was a Chicago policeman for 30 years, we had Chicago policemen on the anti-terrorist task force for years, ever since I can remember. And basically, it's not just Arab terrorism, it's all kinds of terrorism, because it's not just isolated to your Middle Eastern population. So there are intelligence gathering things going on as we speak. And on a local level, some of the things that we do is, for instance, we have a emergency response team that we train here at Riverside Brookfield High School, for instance, last month on 2 occasions where the school superintendent, the principal allowed us to come in here and do some tactical operations. Now, we're going to be coming back and probably after the beginning of the year, along with other departments, to expand our capabilities as an organization, which would give us an opportunity to train and become more professional and proficient at an incident that could happen at the high school or anywhere else in Riverside. So we have the capability of immediate nature, as long as it's not something like bombing of the planes. Yeah. And then we certainly have to rely on the federal government, state government, National Guard, the Army. And we have a whole list, by the way. I've got a list within the last couple of days of every emergency management organization in the country, along with phone numbers. And quite frankly, they're more than willing to help, including training classes.
As a citizen, I can give blood, I can donate to the Red Cross to respond to already done acts of terrorism. I guess I'm concerned about what I hope citizens don't do, such as form vigilante groups, go out and harass local peoples of any group.
What we're talking about there, we're seeing that a slight increase within the last couple of weeks. It's what's called hate crimes. Mm-hmm. It's where you take an action, it's a criminal act addressed against somebody because of a perceived or actual perception of the race, national origin, or sexual preference, or disability, so forth. And what we're trying to do, we've been involved in law enforcement through the years, where we talked about police officers stereotyping individuals, and we ask the general public to do that. Don't judge somebody because of their national origin. Like I said, the Murdoch Center that was destroyed in 1995 in Oklahoma City, that was by a white guy from Oklahoma that did it. It wasn't a terrorist outside the country. It was a terrorist from inside our country.
And getting back to what people can do, I mean, certainly targeting Arab Americans is, in my opinion, despicable, because their feelings for this country are just the same as Americans of any nationality. So what citizens can do is report incidents to the police that are of suspicious nature, whether by any ethnic group. And I've had a couple phone calls already from some of my residents about issues, and we're going to respond to it. Are we going to respond with draconian measures of, locking down things? No, we're not going to do that, because we still live in a free society. But what we are going to do is gather intelligence. If it's an immediate incident, obviously we're going to respond to it in an appropriate manner. But one of the things that law enforcement is doing right now is remaining flexible. You know, I've been in incident command centers down in Florida with the fire chief in Riverside, and we're working as a team to combat and to respond to these kind of issues. So, but getting back to what citizens can do, they can keep their eyes and ears open and report things to the police that are suspicious in nature. And I will tell you, most of the crime that happens in Riverside even today is because somebody's seen something, they call us the next day. Well, what good is that? If you see,
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, really, that's why I was glad somebody called me and mentioned this particular. 2 people called me about the same incident. So we're going to be looking into it, and it's just, you know, and I guess what I'm saying is people have to have faith in their government. Although there's been a lack of faith in government recently, I think this is the time now to start putting some faith in government, because there's many of curtailing of the freedoms of police officers to do certain things. And we're at a time of national crisis, a time of war, and we're going to have to remain flexible and have some faith in people that you put faith in. You give us the faith to give us the faith right now and the responsibility of life and death decisions. We're carrying firearms. We can. So I mean, with those kind of things, I'm hoping people would understand that we're going to use good common sense and try to do the right thing all the time, not simply once in a while, but all the time. With our country in a time of national crisis, do you think it'd be better now that the fact that we really don't know exactly who is still cause of the plane crashes and all that, or any other acts of terrorism that might happen? Do you think we should sit down and talk to these people and talk to these Middle Eastern nations who might have bad feelings about us, distrust towards the Americans, or, you know, any kind of ill feelings? Or should we just, you know, declare war and, you know, if we suspect them as targets, ask them bluntly, and if they think, or we have evidence that says yes, should we go after them?
I think, like, personally, I think it's more of an issue of containment more than, like, combating it, because once we start to say, you know, we're going to combat it and we're going to find out where it's coming from and we start to attack, I think that's just going to cause us, like, more problems in the end. I think more if we try to find out, like Joe said, where it's coming from, like, get to the root of the problem and contain it more, and try to, you know, negotiate with these people and find out what it is that we're doing that's causing them to try to harm us or is causing them to be angry. Maybe we could work something out more, like, verbally and, like, treaty-wise than, yeah, before, besides bombing them, because I think since we do try to, like, you know, help everyone out, it would not really make sense to bomb people, since we're kind of the country who provides aid for everyone else, you know? So we're going to have to come in there and clean up after our own mess.
Well, go ahead. Well, I mean, we have to be very careful how we handle the situation as to what's the message we send to future terrorists. You know, if we choose to go about the diplomatic route, I mean, I think that's probably going to be resorted to as in a cleanup kind of situation where after we bomb them, we're probably going to have to apologize for it. And but you know, we are going to have to respond very strongly, and I think we've done that very well too. I mean, the president's taken, you know, all the right steps in dealing with this so far, and I think that we're very well supported in this, and a lot of people believe in our judgment and how we're going to handle this. So, you know, I think that you know, as a diplomatic route, it would not cause as much. It would, you know, I obviously don't advocate an eye for an eye, but you know, we have to be very clear that we are, you know, a strong national power, and that we will not tolerate any type of attacks on our own soil.
And a nation of laws. Ashley was making a good point about a peace treaty. I think it was last night on the news where the Prime Minister of England, Tony Blair, was saying we have the evidence against bin Laden, and we can build a case. And I see this as similar to the Nazi trials that took place in Nuremberg, that if we can bring the perpetrators to justice, I think we show that law is above violence. And I think what President Bush did last week with the freezing of the assets, I mean, terrorism isn't going to grow without money. And if every country that has bank accounts of these terrorists would freeze assets, that's a big if, I think that would cut off their lifeline.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't see anybody who's willing to give up his life and die just rolling over. I think that there's going to be a struggle, there's going to be military. I don't see how we can possibly avoid it. So we're looking at a situation where we're going to have to surgically take them out of certain positions. And when I say that, we have the cooperation of all the world governments except for one or two. And we actually have the world on our side for probably the first time in my memory. I'm 56 years old.
First time since World War II.
My thing here is, how can you negotiate with a terrorist when they're killing people? And one of the things we talk about as policemen, we have hostage situations, and if somebody starts killing hostages, you have no option but to go in and take them out. So I mean, yeah, it's fine to talk when there's nobody being hurt. Unfortunately, we got a lot of people hurt, and there's going to be more to come, in my opinion, the opinion of many law enforcement officers and the U.S. Attorney General. My thing is, you let them talk to them while they're in fact conspiring to maybe hurt more Americans, or if you know where they're at and you know and specifically know where they're at, because I'm sure they do, attack them and take them out.
You're sure they do?
Well, I'm sorry I have to interrupt everybody. We do have to take another break.
Sure
we'll be right back after these messages to more talking on 21st century issues. Thank you. Century Issues. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan. Before we were talking about what we can do to combat terrorism, now we're going to move on to the goals that terrorists hope to achieve by committing these acts. Ashley, you said you had something to say. Why don't you start us off?
Okay, I don't know what, like, so much if it's, like, really the goal to destroy us as a country, but I think they're trying to destroy, like, our spirit and our nationalism, because I think that's something that they really lack. I think they're very segregated, like, as a whole, as a country, and they're looking for something to believe in, and I think that they kind of, like, focused all their energy on taking away our energy, because I think they kind of want what we have, because as a country we are very united. I mean, we're always going to have those people that stray from the group, but I think, like, as a country we're very powerful, and we believe what we stand for, and we believe in ourselves, and I think they're kind of jealous of that. So I think they're trying to definitely, like, eliminate that and take away what it is that makes us superior to them.
Just to follow up on that, I want to comment that whatever their goal is, ultimately, I think they grossly underestimated the citizens of the United States. Whatever it is, we're going to overcome this. One of the goals in terrorism is to affect the economic status of our country, which they did with United Airlines TWA. The stock market took a dive for several days. It's in a recovery. As we speak today, it was in a recovery. But I really think they underestimated the people of the United States, and we will overcome this. So ultimately, whatever their goals are, they won't achieve it, and we all realize that.
One should point out that a goal of Islam is to make everybody in the world Islamic, Muslims. I mean, just as the goal for Christians is to convert. I mean, that's the Great Commission, to try to make Christians out of everybody. And the question is, how do you go about doing this? And for most people, you use persuasion, you honor their liberties and so forth, but in all religions there are some people that are going to do whatever means possible, and you have to deal with them. I mean, regardless of religion, you have to deal with them. And I'm certainly glad you gentlemen are prepared to deal with them. As an individual,
But that's what's.
I will contact my police department very quickly.
Well, here's the key. The goal of terrorism is fear, and that's in its name itself.
Fear
Put
in the enemy, you mean.
terror of people so that they change what they're doing.
Exactly.
Put and obviously the economy is one of them, but also even at the airlines. I mean, with the new kind of security measures, it's going to change without question the way we've done business, the way we police, the way we have experienced our freedom. I'm just hoping, and we talked about this earlier, that there won't be a loss of Americans' fundamental freedoms, because nobody wants to live in a totalitarian society. Anybody who has children don't want them to grow up to be
oppressed,
little robots later on.
Right.
And that's what this kind of thing can cause if we're not very careful.
But what's so ironic about the whole thing is where Brand is talking about the goals of Islam is to make everybody Islamic, and the Quran preaches peace, and these people preach the opposite. And like I said earlier, they've perverted the main tenets of the Quran, and that's what's so ironic about this whole thing. But also, I think one of their goals was to disrupt, as you said, our financial institutions. What a better target than the World Trade Center with all its investment firms and its law firms and its businesses, and to completely put them under for as long as, I mean, we don't even know the repercussions. I mean, we just don't.
Well, I think we have to be very careful about how we respond to the attacks in the sense of the American citizens more than anything, and because I believe that all the American policies and all the American decisions follow the way of the people, and to that end, I've been very impressed by how America's attitude has not turned so extremely to fear that we're demanding many more demands and increase in safeties, or I mean, obviously there was kind of a rallying around the president, and when he said that we are going to be fighting this very hard, but there's been a lot in the media about how new dangers could appear from terrorism that have been really unfounded. I mean, biological weapons or nuclear weapons that have been really unfounded and have been used to gather ratings very kind of blatantly, irresponsibly by the press that could have easily incited the panic needed for the terrorists to would have achieved their goals. But I think that our strong nationalism that spawned after this and our kind of rallying of the nation has really done a lot to combat the terrorist goal of causing fear and panic.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I think the fear of biological warfare, nuclear warfare, cyber terrorism, I think is real. I think people have to be extremely aware of it.
No, cyber terrorism.
Cyber terrorism, which is the internet.
Internet.
To go in and take funds out of places and really cause havoc amongst our institutions, both financial, governmental, I think is a real terror, and I think people have to be very cognizant of it. Because if we don't, at least be aware of it. I'm not saying live in fear and close your blinds at night and put all the lights on in a house. But what I'm saying is we need to be much more careful than we've ever been, and we need to give our law enforcement authorities the tools to do it. And some of it may be with an overhears. There's been some talk about overhearing, and when you're talking about terrorist organizations, if people want to bring down your country, it's not about like somebody talking to your neighbor on the phone. We're talking about people who are talking about killing other people and taking over and destroying the country as we know it. I think we should be judicious, but at the same time, I think we got to do promptly what the Attorney General is asking for right now.
You're talking about phone taps?
With all the added security measures, do you think they'll be appropriate? Do you think they'll be right? I know I've been reading the paper too, and they're talking about reading people's emails, tapping people's phones, and listening to people's personal conversations.
Target is terrorists, yeah.
But I think
censorship.
I think it just sparks up more fear. I think the more pressure they put on it, and the more they read into it, the more the fear is going to grow. Because if they start, normal everyday citizens, if they start reading into everything we do, I think it's just going to start to get so...
I don't think that's what this is about, quite frankly. I think this is about targeted individuals with terroristic ties, known people that have done it. Again, it falls back on faith in your government, without question. Either you have it or you don't, and you have the capabilities. And right now, for instance, they had one of these gentlemen, and they couldn't get a search warrant to go into his computer. A federal judge wouldn't allow it.
On the other hand,
we had civil liberties, but of these people they give
but this guy's a terrorist, wants to take over our country, wants to destroy our freedoms, wants to kill people. So I have a problem with when we're looking at the freedoms of everybody versus the individual in that particular case. I'm not talking about running roughshod over a group of people.
How about overload? I was listening to a program where they've got more stuff wiretapped than they can ever even monitor.
It takes a long time to get a wiretap in the United States of America. Long time.
All right, well, I'm sorry to
locally, 30 days.
Interrupt everybody, but we have to take another break. We'll be back right after these messages with more talk on 21st century issues. Thank you.
Some people have
21st-century issues. I'd like to thank our panel of thoughtful thinkers and everybody watching at home on RBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Ryan, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye.